Okay, welcome back to episode 11.2, part 2 of manual mode shooting. In this mode, we will be looking at the camera with full manual control. And full manual control means that in the bigger scheme of things, with shutter speed over here, aperture here, ISO, we are now controlling all three components of the exposure triangle, and the camera is not running the ISO values for us like it was previously. Okay, so that means to get started in full manual, we just have to go in and switch off auto ISO. So let's take a look at that now. So we're going to go in the main menu, hit the menu button down here. The ISO setting is already selected. We're on the page 2 of the camera icon menu part there. ISO setting is auto. We're going to go in there, take the top part, go in there and select ISO 100 as our base setting. It will ignore the minimum shutter speed because you are manually controlling the shutter speed. In this case, with the jog dial on the back, and I have aperture on the front. So we're going to say OK to that now. 100 ISO, partially hit that shutter button, and let's see what changes has it now made to the camera's display. Well, off the bat, you can see there is ISO 100 is set there. And then we have this new graphic display down at the bottom, which is the exposure settings. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more on that now and get the camera to focus there by my thumb. We've got the battery icon over here, and we have this new exposure scale right in the middle where that little arrow is moving about. That is the best exposure. That is underexposed as it moves to the left, and that is overexposed as we move it to the right. Okay, we no longer have exposure compensation on the rear dial, so you now control these settings by either changing your shutter speed. You can see that it is now way overexposed. ISO is at 100. It's way overexposed with the camera's lens wide open at f2.8. So we can start increasing that shutter speed, and there we get it in the middle again. So now at 1/15 of a second, pointing straight down at the tabletop, it's getting us a pretty good exposure. Okay, if you want to underexpose slightly, you can just increase your shutter speed just a little bit. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. Next, let's go and overexpose that some more. Now I'm going to do that with the aperture. So I'm going to close the aperture down, and you can see by closing the aperture down, I underexpose a little bit. That's only because I'm pointing at the tabletop. Okay. Now what about the ISO? How do we change that? Well, this is how this camera is designed, with icons for buttons on this rear dial that you need to push to use the dial to change various values. So if I wanted to increase the ISO value now, let's say we want to go up to 800, I would press this edge here at the position of 9 o'clock where it says ISO, give that a press, and we now can increase the ISO value. You see it skipped a little bit there. We can increase the ISO value and take it up to 800. Okay, that's that done. Press it one more time, and we've now locked the ISO at 800. So now it's very bright, and the exposure value scale down here is telling me once again that it's way overexposed. So now I can either increase my aperture value, which is shrinking the actual aperture hole, or I can increase the shutter speed, which lets in less light. And that is basically it. This takes a little bit more practice than partial manual, because now you don't have that very convenient exposure compensation to just nudge some of the values in either aperture priority or shutter speed priority or partial manual. You had your exposure compensation there, so kind of just nudge the camera's decision making either one way or the other, darker or lighter. Now you have to do that with your fingers. Either raise your ISO, lower your ISO, raise your shutter speed, lower your shutter speed, raise your aperture or lower your aperture, and that is full manual control. I will say, being perfectly honest, 80% of the time I shoot this camera in either aperture priority or shutter speed priority, and of that 80%, I'm probably using 60 to 70% of my time on aperture priority. The lighting conditions I tend to shoot in don't give me too much trouble. Let's say I want to shoot at f11 for a landscape. I'm probably shooting in good light anyway, and I'm going to get a decent shutter speed. If that is not the case, then I might switch over to partial manual, so I can control the shutter speed and still remain at the aperture that I want. And the same goes for if I wanted to freeze motion in something like that, I would probably switch over to shutter speed priority. Let's say I wanted to do some more shots at 1,000ths of a second, like I did in the previous video, in the shutter speed priority video, episode 10, where we saw some sample images where I was freezing water in the little fountain. Getting that up to 1,000ths of a second and keeping it there means going into either partial or full manual control. Okay, so there are situations where I would use it. 80% of the time I'm either in aperture priority or shutter speed priority. That last 20% will be manual, full manual, or even program mode. If I'm just shooting for fun, trying to get the kids, then sometimes I will let the Ricoh take over everything and do all the work for me. That's the chances of that happening are slim, but I do it occasionally. If I'm going to hand the camera over to someone to let them take some pictures that are not experienced, then I will pop it over to program mode and let them take a lot of shots. If I've got to be in the shot as well, considering the amount of images that are taken in this house, I am in very few of them. And so if I was going to let someone use the camera that's not familiar with the Ricoh or photography at all, I would just pop it on over in program mode and let them shoot that way. But I will use it occasionally. Sometimes I do venture to be a purist and take full manual control. I could probably see myself doing that shooting landscapes where I've got a very calm, still situation, got the camera maybe on a tripod, and I'm looking at that exposure value on the back. And in that case, I would probably have the histogram up as well. And we're going to be looking at that in a future video, looking at what type of information you can get on the screen and when is it useful to have it there. Okay, so that's manual mode shooting 11.2 completed now, and then we're going to move on. Next episode, we're going to be looking at the JPEG profiles. Okay, and take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay, bye.